One of the things that personally scares me the most is medicine. I know maybe it's a little odd to be afraid of something that is meant to heal you, but the thought of being sliced open to fix certain ailments, or even having a simple tooth drilled into gives me the shakes, let alone being blasted with radiation just to kill specific cells. We should all be grateful we live in this modern era though. Medicine's come a long way. While we no longer live in the age where bloodletting and leeches are used as common fixes, there are still procedures that we have to look back and wonder, why did we do that, even in our modern age? Lobotomy. An operation this dark world of ours would rather forget. Our history is rife with pain and suffering, full of tragedy. I implore you, come and explore this dark world of ours. Let me introduce Antonio Igaz Moniz, the creator of the Leucotomy. Yes, you heard that right. Leucotomy. Leucotomy is what the lobotomy was originally called. The name lobotomy wasn't coined until the operation moved to the United States. It's an operation in which the doctor would cut open the patient's head and sever multiple strands of the brain tissue in the prefrontal lobe. This part of the brain is key in many facets: impulse control, organization, attention span, planning, and most important of all, personality. The prefrontal lobe is also the root cause for many neurological diseases, such as schizophrenia, ADHD, bipolarism, and depression. Practically any issue that can affect your understanding of the world as well as who you are. In an odd sense, you're nothing without the prefrontal lobe. It's your soul. And for such a delicate part of the human conscience, you would think we haven't started experimenting with the brain until more recent human history. But it'd be quite the contrary, in fact. We've been experimenting with our heads since prehistoric times, and the most common remedy they used even back then has still seen use in our modern history.
Hello, Mandy. How are you?
I'm great. I've never felt better.
What happened to your head?
I just got trepanned.
Tree what?
Trepanned. Let me explain. It all started billions of years ago when our forefathers used to pound spikes into each other's heads. Unfortunately, this primitive method occasionally had disastrous side effects. Today, thanks to the advent of modern technology, we don't have to worry about that anymore.
Trepanning was commonly done to relieve pressure in the brain. This was thought to cure things such as depression, hallucinations, fix someone's personality, or simply cure a headache. Though trepanation isn't what inspired Antonio to pursue leucotomy, it helped lay the seeds for what would eventually become leucotomy. His research began when he had read about how chimps with their frontal lobes removed acted calmer, cooperated more, and above all else, were easier to work with. While this didn't make Antonio immediately jump to the idea of performing leucotomies on humans, he did start to get interest in the subject upon hearing about how a young stockbroker who had frontal lobe damage also had a drastic change after his accident. He went from shy, conservative, and introverted to someone oozing with self-confidence, even boastful and arrogant. Upon enlisting the help of a colleague, Antonio performed his first ever leucotomy on an elderly woman. She suffered from a host of mental issues, most notable of all being depression and hallucinations. They drilled into her skull and poured absolute alcohol into her head to dissolve the prefrontal lobe. The surgery was a success. Shortly after this, the two men created a device specifically designed for leucotomy, the Leucotomy. It was designed to cut away at the white matter that connected the prefrontal lobe to the rest of the brain. The two men performed dozens of leucotomies. The Nobel Prize Committee would later describe their work with the leucotomy as one of the most important discoveries ever in psychiatric medicine. They awarded Moniz the Nobel Peace Prize in 1949 Even back then, there were some criticisms. Patients were referred to as zombies after the procedure, mentally invalid, or, as some people said it, not all there. Even with a slight backlash at the time though, many medical practitioners applauded the surgery and saw it as a godsend cure to mental illness. Worst of all though, they improved upon it. Dr. Walter Jackson Freeman II is arguably more linked to the dark history of the lobotomy than Antonio himself. His grandfather was a renowned surgeon, the first man to successfully remove a brain tumor. His own father, a doctor of lesser accomplishment. As a young man, though, he didn't quite share the same interest in medical affairs. But after graduating from what was currently known as Yale College in 1916, he began to study neurology at the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. During his spare time, he found work in a psychiatric hospital, although he found the condition of the place heartbreaking. In his own words, he called it a modern tragedy. Walter's goal from that point onwards was to empty the psych wards. Of course, this was no small task. Back in the early 20th century, people could be admitted for a multitude of reasons. Depression, anger, and homosexuality just being a few. Upon learning about Antonio's operation, Walter wanted to try it himself, but there was one small problem. Walter Freeman wasn't a neurosurgeon, so he enlisted the help of a man by the name of James Watts. After studying the procedure for nearly a year, Freeman and Watts performed their first prefrontal lobotomy on a housewife who suffered a lot of the same issues that Antonio had with his first patient. And while the woman suffered strong convulsions after the surgery, she survived for another 5 years. The two men considered the surgery a success and performed numerous other ones. Though there was one small problem. A notable sum of the operations they were performing were just follow-up procedures. Many of the patients were displaying the same symptoms they had before the lobotomy. Though the two men really did hit their stride. By 1945, both of them had performed over 200 lobotomies together. A pretty sizable number for such a complicated surgery. It wasn't enough for Walter Freeman. He was growing tired of how long it took, how hard it was to do the procedure, and it was getting him nowhere closer to his goal of emptying the psych wards. So he began to look for an alternative means of performing lobotomy, and his research taught him one valuable lesson. The eyes truly are the window to the soul. Walter's research brought him to an article about how a doctor in Italy was performing neurosurgery through the patient's eye sockets, and he thought to himself that he could perform lobotomies in the same light. Walter jumped into the idea of it headfirst, and it wouldn't be long before he would try the first transorbital lobotomy on Sally Ellen Ionesco, a 29-year-old woman who, according to the documents of the time, claimed that she was violently suicidal. Freeman put her under with electroshock therapy and then used ice picks to perform the procedure. He put the picks in between her eye sockets, took a small mallet to the base of them, and then just simply tabbed away until he broke the skull. After that, the procedure was just a simple leucotomy. He cut away the fibers of the brain that connected it to the prefrontal lobe, and he was done. And although she suffered some memory loss after the surgery, she did live a long and happy life. Freeman performed his new surgery in private though, never telling James about any of it. James didn't find out until he came into the office of Walter to find him performing it. All Walter did was casually ask James to take a picture of him performing it. James left the office and their relationship quickly dissolved after that, the two sharing very different viewpoints of how to perform neurosurgery. Though even without an assistant, Walter thrived. He finally coined the name lobotomy, calling his variation of the procedure a transorbital lobotomy. He created the first orbital clasp, modeling it after the ice picks he used on Sally Ellen. After this, with his new tool in hand, he took to the road, wanting to show the American people the potential of the transorbital lobotomy. Despite popular rumors, I feel I need to dismiss the idea that Walter Freeman ever nicknamed his van the Lobotomobile. Despite it being a very funny and fitting name for his vehicle, Walter Freeman just traveled around in a regular old van. The name of the Lobotomobile didn't surface until a decade after his death. Though it didn't have a catchy name, many people were excited to see Walter Freeman roll into town. He offered a means of treatment for the most troublesome of patients. For many people working in the psych wards back then, Walter Freeman was seen as a saint. He taught the staff how to perform the procedure during the operation. At most, he did 25 lobotomies in a single day, while a man he taught did 75 lobotomies in one day. He became more of a showman as he grew famous, posing for pictures in the middle of the procedure, inserting 2 pics into the patient at the same time, and commonly inviting the media to watch and document him. His daughter would jokingly call him the Henry Ford of lobotomies. Though his overzealousness cost him a life on more than one occasion. One incident of note is a time where he was performing the procedure and a pick slid too far past into the patient's prefrontal lobe, penetrating too deep into the brain and killing the patient. Walter shrugged it off and moved on to the next patient without any concern. The national rate of lobotomy skyrocketed from just over 150 annually in 1945 to over 5,000 in 1949. It's estimated that over 20,000 lobotomies have taken place in the United States, over 4,000 of which Walter Freeman could attest for. 1,000 of those lobotomies were on people who deemed themselves homosexual, and over a dozen of them were performed on children, the youngest of which was 4 years old at the time. Freeman became such a star that celebrities and politicians alike came for his aid. One of America's top actors at the time, Warner Baxter, an Academy Award-winning actor, was suffering from arthritis. It was so prevalent that he underwent an ill-advised lobotomy headed by the one and only Dr. Walter Freeman himself. While the lobotomy wouldn't be the means of his end, his arthritis did calm down and he complained about less pain, though he began to suffer seizures and memory loss afterwards. He died from pneumonia only a few short weeks after the lobotomy. The most notable patient that Freeman ever performed on is one the Kennedy family tried to hide away, Rosemary Kennedy, eldest daughter to the notable Kennedy family. Over complications with her birth, she was forced to stay in the birth canal for over 2 hours, and this made her a bit slower than the rest of her family. As well, her attitude was far more rebellious than that of her sisters. She was a free spirit, and this was counterintuitive to the Kennedy standard. With fear that their political careers could be jeopardized by her misbehaving one day, they deemed it fit to give her a lobotomy. She underwent the procedure just a few years before Walter began practicing transorbital lobotomies, and the lobotomy was a complete failure. Her mental capacity was diminished to that of a 2-year-old. She couldn't walk or talk properly anymore, and the Kennedy family had her institutionalized for the remainder of her life, hiding away from the public's eyes until her death in 2005. Walter's last lobotomy would be to a woman by the name of Helen Mortensen. She was a prior patient of his, coming in for her 3rd lobotomy as her psychiatric problems were surfacing once again. Though by an unsteady hand, he severed a blood vessel in her brain, and she perished a few days later. Walter was stripped of his medical license shortly after this incident, and the world was beginning to turn on him. He no longer was the great man of medicine he was back in the 40s and 50s. By the time the 60s came around, lobotomies were seen as barbaric. Walter was sure his procedure saved lives though. Until his death in 1972, he toured the country meeting up with his old patients, seeing if he truly changed their lives for the better. While an egotistical and sometimes callous man, I think the one thing we have to remember about Walter Freeman, despite what he had done, he truly believed what he was doing was just. Medical science is all about progress. Even things we do today might be considered barbaric 40 to 50 years today. The road to hell will forever be paved with good intentions. Hey guys, I'm hoping you enjoyed the new content. I'm hoping to upload again on a more regular schedule, so I guess look forward to seeing my face more often. You could find a link to all the music used in this video down below, as well as credits to whoever supplied it. Please like, subscribe, share, all the regular YouTube crap that's done nowadays. And until then, stay safe and have a wonderful day.